is 13-13-32. I mentioned this earlier on. There is some suggestion that some of the country's biggest shopping malls want to be politician-free zones, given there are federal and state elections just around the corner. The Shopping Centre Council of Australia has prepared a submission to the Federal Joint Committee on Electoral Affairs, arguing that politicians should not have automatic access to centres, and furthermore, centre managers have an obligation to protect patrons and shoppers from interference and harassment. Well, Scott Driscoll is the Executive Director of the Retailers Association of Australia. I thought we'd get his take on all of this, and I'm pleased to say he's on the line. Hi, Scott.
G'day, Stuart. How are you?
I'm very well. Is this a fair move by the Shopping Centre Council or a massive overreaction?
Mate, I think this is extraordinary. I think it's an absolute overreaction, and I think, there's obviously something more afoot here, but, the real irony is these are the guys, these are the very people that have gone out of their way over the last few years to destroy Main Street Australia, to drag as many people into their centres as they can.
Yes.
Now they want to, be the gatekeeper as well.
Yes, to determine who they can let in and who they can't let in. And look, it's been one of those traditional set pieces of election campaigns, and it creates a little bit of excitement for an hour or so as a leading politician makes their way through a shopping centre. Is it such an onerous burden on the shopping centres themselves to have a politician there for an hour a day?
Oh, look, it shouldn't be, and it isn't. And I think any fair-minded person that looks at this, they'd sort of say, well, these owners are a bit of a wowser sort of an attitude to suggest that that's a bit too much of an impost. And quite frankly, if these guys were in touch with their tenants and actually realised that this little media scrum and those politicians and those hangers-on and advisors might buy a sandwich and a coffee and support the local retailers in that centre, I think everyone's better off.
It tends to be all good for business, doesn't it? Because quite often they want to be photographed chatting with the locals and maybe a coffee or a donut in their hand, those sorts of things. It's obvious those types of items are going to be purchased from that shopping centre, so it's hardly bad for business, is it, Scott?
Right, it's not bad for business. It's not bad for the profile of the centre. It's certainly not bad for the profile of the shop that happens to get in the background of the news that goes around the state or the nation either. So I think the Shopping Centre Council's probably bitten a bit more off than it could chew this morning and may regret the release that it's put out.
It's a very strange one. I mean, the other thing is, of course, some of those shopping centre visits can enter into folklore. We remember so well Paul Keating going back all of those years ago where some bloke walked up to him giving him some curry. He turned around and said, "Why don't you get a job?" Well, of course, that entered into electioneering folklore, didn't it?
Yeah, I think Bob Hawke probably got himself pretty close to something like that as well. And, I think at the end of the day, mums in the prams and everything, they don't get a lot of chance to stick a tough question to a politician.
Yes.
Why should we take that away from them?
And that's quite right. And a point I made earlier on, we quite often lament the fact that in this day and age, many of our politicians seemingly are out of touch and we don't get to interact with politicians on a regular basis, and we feel somehow disenfranchised from the decision-making source and that type of thing, whereas the shopping centres, railway stations, letterbox drops, those types of things are ways that politicians can stay in touch.
Well, they are, Stuart, and I'd hate to see Kevin Rudd be taken away the opportunity to actually be asked some questions that perhaps Tony Abbott's had the backbone to answer, and let's get him out in the public. Let's get all politicians out there and fully accountable and put them on the spot.
Yeah, quite right. Another interesting aspect of all of this, a ban on politicians, I was looking at some detail. It could potentially be unconstitutional. There's this implied freedom of political communication, and without getting too involved in it, in 92, the High Court recognised the need for freedom of communication on political matters, with the basic rationale being the protection of political speech is essential to facilitating our constitutional system. So if you're all of a sudden then putting the slows on that and saying, well, no, we've got to back away from that, you may actually find yourself in breach of the Constitution.
Well, Stuart, it's as you said. I mean, it's a technical way of saying let's apply some common sense. And what are they?
Well, it took the High Court to do it. Yeah. 7 judges of the High Court, no less.
Throw some lawyers in, and sometimes goodness knows. But look, who are we protecting here? Are we really suggesting that these politicians are going to come in and crash tackle mums with prams and do all sorts of diabolical things to retailers?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think this is a little impost for half an hour to an hour on some shopping centre managers that measure their time and value by the minute and like to on-charge it to retailers. So
that's
let's get this back to reality.
Yeah, quite right. And of course, for those babies who might be in the firing line for a kiss from a politician, as long as mum or dad's got them strapped into the stroller, they should be safe.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, if I was in a pram down in New South Wales, I hear Christina Keneally's actually all for, bucking this and, let her in there. Let her give some young kids a kiss on the cheek, and probably the dads are going to line up for one as well.
I think you're probably right. Yes, she's a popular lady already. There were the polls saying 73% of voters at least like her. So, look, I think it's one of those things. It does add a bit of colour. It adds a bit of excitement. And occasionally, of course, it throws up one of those quirky stories of an election campaign where they do get a curly question, or they are overheard mumbling something out of the side of their mouths at some person who won't leave them alone. It all adds to the fun of the fair. We don't have the sort of stump speeches anymore, and so the shopping centres are about as close as it gets to traditional electioneering.
They are, and I think you or one of your listeners made the comment earlier, if we're trying to sanitise the election process, we're going to get what we deserve.
That's quite right. And already I think it is far too sanitised anyway. So much of it is very much done at arm's length with very, very tightly controlled media set pieces from the major players every single day, whereas the shopping centre walkthrough is one of those very, very rare opportunities where you might get something out of left field that might suddenly spark a reaction from a politician that we weren't expecting or they weren't expecting.
Very, very difficult to stage manage that pensioner on a mission.
That's quite right. Or the bloke who won't give up and gets told, why don't you go and get yourself a job?
Exactly.
Good stuff, mate. Nice to catch up with you.
Thanks, Stuart.
All the best. Scott Driscoll there. He is the man in charge of the Retailers Association. So as far as they are concerned, no thank you very much. The Shopping Centre Council of Australia barking up the wrong tree on this one. Happy to see the pollies have their wander through come election time.